Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome everyone to today's explainer. If you're an investor looking out at the horizon of global tech, you already know that our most critical infrastructures are facing an absolutely unprecedented scaling crisis. Today, we're going to explore a truly paradigm-shifting pilot implementation from MW Relogic AI. We're looking at a technology that doesn't just patch a problem, but fundamentally solves a catastrophic flaw in how global infrastructure processes information.
So, how in the world do we avoid modern systemic collapse? I know, it sounds a bit dramatic, right? But it's the exact reality for operations at a massive global scale. Think about global logistics networks or, airspace management. In these environments, you've got a staggering number of variables overlapping, and they are all competing simultaneously for processing and decision priority. The sheer scale and speed of modern operations mean that traditional ways of managing this data they're being pushed way past their breaking point, bringing us dangerously close to systemic collapse.
And that brings us to the hidden threat that's basically crippling our systems, the concurrency bottleneck. Now, this isn't some immediate explosive crash. Instead, it's the point where a system's ability to process high volumes of overlapping events simply breaks down. You start seeing these contention effects, delayed responses, conflicting data states, just a progressive loss of operational clarity. It essentially forces massive infrastructures into this state of reactive, fragmented decision-making, where suddenly manual intervention becomes the only way to keep the whole shebang moving.
To understand how we actually overcome this, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll hit 1. The concurrency bottleneck, 2. The failure of traditional models, 3. The MW Relogic AI paradigm, 4. Dynamic multidimensional architecture, 5. The flow maestro, and finally 6. The strategic decision layer. All right, section 1, the concurrency bottleneck, the hidden threat. Okay, so current computational architectures operate under a sequential synchronized coordination model. Basically, they're anchored to a single, rigid external time reference. Now, in stable, low-stress conditions, this works perfectly fine. But when disruptions happen and you suddenly have massive, simultaneous variables competing for priority, this synchronized queue becomes a massive trap. It's literally like thousands of cars suddenly forced into a single-lane toll booth. The system just suffers from overload, which immediately strips away operational clarity and forces human operators to step in and manually untangle the mess. So the crucial point is this, and it's essential to grasp as an investor. We are absolutely not running out of computing power. Performance degradation doesn't occur because of some physical hardware limitation. It happens because of how computation was organized for that system. We're failing because forcing everything into a single timeline is just fundamentally flawed for the modern age.
Which leads us right into section 2, the failure of traditional models, why current fixes fail.
The immediate knee-jerk reaction for a lot of organizations is to just throw money at it. Buy more servers, or maybe slap standard machine learning models onto the problem. But you cannot fix a fundamentally flawed sequential model with more hardware. Actually, scratch that. It's more like buying a shinier car to fix a traffic jam. You can make this single-file line predict what's next slightly better, sure, but it's still a single-file line. More hardware and standard ML are just expensive band-aids. They don't alter the fundamental ways simultaneous flows are processed, so the bottleneck stays right where it is.
Enter section 3, the MW Relogic AI paradigm, the ultimate shift. And this brilliantly illustrates where the core shift happens. The old way? It treats data as isolated dots, all competing for priority in a single synchronized queue. But the MW Relogic AI way treats information as dynamic flows. We're moving from a flat, sequential traffic jam into multidimensional orchestration. This is a real game changer because it preserves the context of how these data points interact and evolve over time.
Let's dig deeper into how this actually works. Section 4, Dynamic Multidimensional Architecture, the technical moat. So instead of a rigid global clock, the system actually decentralizes internal time. For overlapping processes, it uses multidimensional parallel cycles. That means distinct operational realities run simultaneously without waiting for one another. And to prevent data collisions when multiple things need to write to the system at once, it uses frequency isolation. It literally creates a bubble of silence around a data flow so it can be recorded without any corruption. Plus, for variable urgency, it introduces temporal elasticity, so it can dilate time for deep analysis of suspicious activity or compress it for maximum speed when things are stable. Pretty amazing, right? Now here is where it gets really wild. A massive leap forward for data concurrency is treating the path itself as the information. By treating data not just as a static 1 or 0, but as a vector with directional force or torque, the system identifies the motion signature of the data. Two things that look identical to a standard binary system? No way. They're recognized as totally distinct trajectories here. This allows just massive amounts of concurrent flows to coexist in the exact same infrastructure safely, with absolutely zero overlapping or crashing.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 5, the Flow Maestro, Proactive Intelligence.
Okay, so we have this incredible architecture, but it needs a brain. The intelligence in MW Relogic AI acts as a flow maestro. It isn't just some reactive processor of commands. First, it recognizes the causal trajectory, meaning it literally sees where an event is going to collapse before it even becomes a definitive record. Second, it monitors variables like data density and torque to dynamically adjust the rhythm of the system. It acts way more like a living organism, accelerating or decelerating as needed. And third, it makes decisions based on legitimacy and strategic relevance. So a critical aircraft trajectory gets right of way over a routine system ping, instantly. All right, final piece of the puzzle, Section 6, the strategic decision layer, the pilot integration.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it approaches risk mitigation. As an investor, you know that replacing core infrastructure is an absolute nightmare of downtime and astronomical costs. Well, the genius here is that MW Relogic AI operates as a higher decision layer. It overlays existing infrastructure exactly at the friction points where traditional coordination collapses. There is no rip and replace required. By preserving the existing hardware investments and just adding this hyper-intelligent layer of fluid orchestration, it translates deep, complex technical capability into immediate, scalable business value.
So, what does this all mean? As global systems scale into just unprecedented complexity, the ability to interpret and act on dynamic flows isn't just a nice upgrade, it is a survival requirement. The bottleneck of sequence and synchronized time is holding back the modern world. So, the question you must ask as you evaluate the impact of the MW Relogic AI Pilot is this: is your infrastructure just reacting to the present chaos, or is it intelligently orchestrating the future? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.